Morning, guys.
Morning. Oh, recording.
Oh, boy.
Welcome to our second webinar in the series Strong Leesburg. Today, we're going to be talking about how to be a good board member and how to choose a board that is right for you. We have a stellar panel with us today. We have Carmen Collin with the Education Foundation. She has worked with boards for many years. We're going to let you introduce yourself in just a bit, but she's worked with boards for many years and also serves on boards. We have Fratello with us. He is a retired president from the South Lake Chamber of Commerce, and we're so excited to have him. He obviously has had a lot of experience with boards as well. And then Braun, who has served on many boards, a very good board member. I've seen him in action. So that is why we've invited all of these panelists. And of course, we have our co-host, Mark Robert Schwartz. So Mark, thank you for being here and thank you for helping us. So why don't we just go ahead and start? If you can just tell us a little bit, each of you, about your, about yourself as far as in reference to, your experience working with boards, and then we'll get the discussion going. Let me just real quick, for the people who are on the Zoom with us live, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat or any comments, and we'll try to pick those up as we go. So how about, let's start with you, Ray.
Okay, so, I was doing some research here, and I was kind of shocked to find out I've been volunteering for 43 years. And it kind of surprised me that it had been that long. So that was just, joining various organizations, eventually working on to boards of directors. But I guess the thing for me is that the first organization I ever joined was a slow pitch softball league board, because I was mad because the city was not doing a good job taking care of the fields. And every time we tried to play a game, they canceled them because the fields were in bad shape. So I joined this organization, and we used to go to the city council meetings and just kind of squawk at them, always complain, and they would never do anything to help us. So this old city manager pulled me aside and he said, that's not the way to do it. He goes, come in and offer something. So the next meeting, we came in with a bunch of folks that were businesses that could help maintain some of the fields. And all of a sudden, the city took a different attitude. And I found out that rather than squawking from the outside, if you get in on the inside, you're a lot better off. And eventually, that work on that softball league eventually got me a position with the city in the recreation department, which started me in a 10-year career as assistant recreation director for my city. And I say that because you never know where it could go, because the next thing I did was I joined the Batavia area JCs. Spent about 10 years in the JCs, and our Chamber of Commerce person in Batavia was fired, and a friend of mine called me up and said, you should apply for this position. And I said, I don't know anything about Chambers of Commerce. He goes, sure you do. You were in the JCs, you learned in individual development, community development, management development. So he says, take a shot. What do you got to lose? So I did, and got the job with the Genesee County Chamber of Commerce, which started my professional career that lasted 25 years. And you just never know where it could go when you get involved in organizations. But if you're looking in terms of, organizations that I work with, there's a lot of them who've been on the business side. You just have to do that because you're in a Chamber of Commerce, as you well know, Sandy. So things like our leadership Genesee in New York, I was involved with a large Western New York Chamber Alliance, which was 22 chambers across Western New York, eventually chair of that. Then our state organization, the Chamber Alliance in New York, ended up the chair of that in my last year before I left. A Batavia Development Corporation, which worked on local issues that I participated in. But then when I came to Florida, Lake Sumter Community College Advisory Committee. I was on the Lake County Industrial Development Authority for a while. The Chamber Alliance of Lake County, of course, which I helped co-found with a couple other folks. The Florida Association of Chamber Professionals, our state organization. And then recently, the Lake Sumter MPO, I was on the advisory committee, and the Habitat for Humanity board is what I'm on right now. And I really love that. And you just keep active. Then on the other side, when you join organizations, it comes back to like the passion in your community. And those are things like a high school foundation board, and like I said, the JC's, St. Nicholas Club, Paolo Busti, all these Italian clubs. So I got involved in a lot of them, and I was kind of shocked to see that there's been that many. But again, when all is said and done, it seems to me that if you have a passion to volunteer, you want to give back to your community, no better way to do it than joining an organization and then be on a board of directors. Is that enough?
That was great. Thank you. Now you know why we asked Ray to come on our panel. So how about ladies? Carmen?
Oh, thank you. I'm Carmen Collin, and I currently serve as the executive director of the Education Foundation of Lake County. My career started in newspaper, and through my responsibilities with the newspaper, it caused me to be heavily involved in the community. And I'm embarrassed to say at one point, I actually sat on 16 boards at the same time, and which would be a clear testament to if you sit on 16 boards at the same time, you are not a good board member. But over the years, I have served on Altrusa and a leadership role, the partnership in a leadership role, leadership Lake County in a leadership role, United Way in a leadership role, and Haven, which is near and dear to my heart for domestic violence. And obviously the Lake Sumter board. And the way I ended up in my position is I sat on the Education Foundation board, and I had been on it for about 6 years, and we were losing the director at the same time the newspaper was selling. And I thought, oh, that little job, I could do that. I could work a couple hours a day, 3 or 4 days a week. Yeah, this sounds like a plan. Well, I never knew newspaper was so easy until I took over a nonprofit, because a nonprofit director works 24/7 plus 24/7 in the same 24. So it is a huge responsibility, and that is why it is so critical for board members to have the right board members in place.
I can confirm that because I got a text message from Carmen at 10:40 last night. So she is clearly a 24/7 person.
Unbelievable.
That's what I said when I got it. I'm like, unbelievable.
We imagine the guy that got it at 12:25.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Carmen, for being here. Phil, please introduce yourself.
I'm Phil Braun. I work for the Central Florida Health, which is now UF Health, for all you Gators out there, which I am not, but that's okay. I'm learning the deal. I don't have quite as the diverse experience on many different boards, but I have been serving on, at least in some capacity, on a board since I came back to Leesburg for, I guess now it's getting close to, probably 20 something plus years. I've been back. I've started off in the Kiwanis, and then kind of moved on to the Boys and Girls Club, which is just a passion of mine. So that's kind of what drove me to the Boys and Girls Club, and did that for a lot of years, even up to the point of when they kind of merged with the Orlando board. Also the partnership, I've been very involved in the partnership over the years. I currently serve on advisory, both in the Boys and Girls Club and the partnership. I went through all their leadership roles and learned a lot during those years. I've served on some foundation boards. I've served on the advisory board of the college for the business management school. And so all of that. And, I work for a not-for-profit, although it's not, there's a lot of different types of not-for-profits, but I've worked for a not-for-profit, which we also have a foundation. So experienced kind of the management side too, helping those boards navigate their roles and what they should do and what their fiduciary duties are and those kinds of things. So.
Very good. Mark.
Oh,
Now Mark drills us.
yeah. So
I'm sorry, I thought you got my text. Go ahead.
No, when I'm doing these, this is my full attention right here. I put my phone off to the side, Sandy Moore.
Okay, my bad.
Yeah, so I've also served on quite a few boards. When I first started the company, one of the things that I was advised was, see how, join boards, great way to make connections, great way to network, great way to make contacts. And I found myself overextended, and over time started to understand what were the boards that, number one, I really felt like I was bringing value to. There were some that were fabulous organizations, but they just, to Ray's point, they weren't resonating with me. So while they might have been good networking opportunities, I did not feel that I was bringing value to them. And when my term came up, politely stepped down, which is something I kind of want to talk with you guys about as we get a little bit more into this. Yeah, and some of the boards, some of the boards are what I would call very functional. And others, there are those that I feel like we're just there to approve minutes, and we're just there to approve, sometimes it feels like decisions that have already been made. So I think there's also different types of boards, and would welcome you guys weighing in on some of that as well. What are you looking for in a board member? Are you looking for someone who's passive, who's going to kind of go along with what you guys are trying to do? Or are you looking for people who are pushback? Does anybody want to start with that first question? Hey, so let's start with Carmen.
I want every board member I have fighting me tooth and nail and going through every single thing I do. They need to be a visionary. Nonprofit work requires so much day-to-day operational stuff that you get lost in being a visionary. And that's the most important thing that a board member can do. And if they, I have several members on the board that wouldn't even join a rubber stamp board. I mean, ours are very vocal. Zoom has prohibited a lot of the good conversation that our board has. But, our board members are encouraged to speak up, to investigate, to go through everything in this organization with a fine-tooth comb. Because transparency is crucial when you're out raising money. So fight me all the way.
Bill, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Carmen said about
what is the question?
creating what kind of board member we would look for. Is that kind of,
yeah. Well, I think I said earlier that obviously passion for the mission is really, really important. And you could tell a mile away, for us that have been doing this a long time, when somebody has that special passion. Very, very important. What we used to do at the chamber is that we had a nominating committee, and the nominating committee would kind of look at where the gaps were. Did we need somebody from because we were a regional chamber? Do we need somebody from mascot? We need females, cultural diversity, skills, were important. We might be taking a focus on marketing for that year in the business plan, and we might need some assistance that way. Those kinds of things would become very important. But then, I always look for no political agenda or narrow interest. So if somebody comes in and if you're recruiting them and they've got just a very narrow focus, I found over the years that sometimes you could have some troubles with that. Sometimes it works well, but the political agenda is what you got to watch out for, especially in chambers of commerce. So always was aware of that. But really, one of the first things is I would ask is, do you have the time to serve? That was the very first question. And even more fundamental, I would say, can you come to a board meeting on Thursday morning at 8 o'clock once a month? And if the answer was no, they're out. No matter how good they were, what good is it going to do you? So they had to have the time to serve, and they had the willingness to serve. Also, when you're sitting on a board, and you're sitting there kind of watching what's happening in the meeting, you're looking for who's the good listeners, and who's articulate and voicing what the discussion's all about. So very, very important. And then, of course, selfishly, you're looking for someone with a strong community network. You could appreciate that sometimes board members have to go out and fundraise for you. You need connections into the community, and those folks have them. So you put all those together and that kind of makes sense. Just a little note on the good listener portion of it. I had one particular guy up in New York, and he was very passive, very quiet. And during the meetings, we had a lot of folks that loved to really talk and others that didn't talk too much. But when this guy spoke, he was right dead on. And when he said something, that whole board stopped and listened to him. And so you knew when he was saying something, it was important. And that's the kind of folks you kind of look for. And, you know, if you're going to succeed greatly when you're able to find a group like that.
Phil, you've been involved with a couple of boards, if I'm not mistaken, that have had to deal with some pretty significant issues. You know, whether they were financial, whether they were a turnover in executive leadership, you know, whatever the case may be. What role do you see yourself and your board as far as taking the reins in those type of situations? You know, and let me just add to that real quick. I think on the financial side, I can't tell you how many meetings I sat through where they would hand us, you know, the Excel spreadsheet, and somebody would just kind of whiz through a bunch of numbers. And I'm a pretty savvy guy, but there are other times I'm going, I have no idea what they're pointing at. You know, am I being misdirected? Should I be asking more questions? You know, so talk a little bit about some of the roles that you've played on some of the boards you sat on that have had to step up to some situations.
Is that
Wow.
me?
Yeah,
No,
no,
no.
I think, yeah, unfortunately, you stay on a board long enough, a not-for-profit board long enough, and sometimes I think I stayed too long sometimes and didn't move on to others, but you do run into those types of situations that you're talking about, Mark, and yeah, there depends on what role you're in. You know, a lot of times if you happen to be one of the officers, then you obviously have to step up and kind of help out and try to bridge that gap before you can find that next person to come in and manage it, which is hard to do because we all, you know, as board members, a lot of us have other full-time jobs. So I think that's always difficult when you're in those difficult situations. From when you lose even like Carmen, you know, talked about losing the executive director when she was on the board and having to step into that role, and then it actually turned into the role for her. But that's not always the case. So you have that interim period that you do, but you have to, you know, always find it's just a fine line for board members to where you want to ask the right questions, like Carmen said, push back, and you want to have the visionary. But I often caution, especially the boards that I represent, is that you also hired that executive director, you hired that manager, and if you've lost that trust that you've got to push back that hard, then you've got to re-examine that, right? I mean, I think it's important tonight not overmanage as a board. I think the board is, like Carmen said, visionary, bring up ideas. Some boards, though, it's just for fundraising, right? I mean, that's one of their key roles is to go out and fundraise. Sometimes fundraising is not as big a focus, and it's the oversight of, as you said, of the financials. And again, going back to what Ray said about the diversity of different types of people on the board, I don't think you have to necessarily be the one. If you're not the financial person, you don't necessarily have to be that financial person, but you need to make sure you have those people on your board that you can go to and ask questions who are doing that oversight role, right? Because not all of us have that strength, and we may have other strengths. So I think that was something that Ray said resonated with me. It's just finding the different, combining a bunch of different diversity and strengths together. I think help make a good board. I don't know if I answered your question, Mark. It's hard to give specific details back on some of those of where you really just kind of rally. If you have a good board, you rally together and you assign different tasks and boards that have executive directors, but then have other management under them. It's really important that as a board member, you're there for that other management that hasn't left, right? You're going to have people like, for instance, with the Boys and Girls Club, I know we've had turnover there, and you still have staff there that needs leadership, has questions, and especially if you're in an officer position of the board, you have to kind of be there for them and help them with those. And that's probably some of the more difficult times of being on the board that I recall.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that a board is so critical, and one of the roles, which is governance. And when that governance is put into place, there needs to be planning for events, because like Phil says, it's going to happen. But you need a succession plan. You need to be finely detailed as to whose responsibility is what until you can get through, the whatever situation or crisis you're in.
Yeah, I do
And
find a lot of boards are bad about succession planning. It's a very hard thing for not-for-profits, so succession planning.
Well, and I want to say, I want to ask, the difference. And I know, Carmen, you said, I want a board that pushes back. I want somebody, but what is the difference between, I mean, like, where's that fine line between leadership and vision and trying to manage the organization or micromanage the organization as a board member? Because that's two different things, I think. So what do you all feel about that?
Well, I think the board has three major roles, and that is the fiduciary responsibility to the organization, to ensure the organization has adequate resources to accomplish its mission. And then again, governance, because governance is critical. As far as the day-to-day operations, unless you need help, there should be no interaction between board and day-to-day operations.
Yeah, the way I always looked at it was that the board is there, they're policymakers, and that they're the 30,000 foot level. They're way up there. They're looking at the big picture, and they're coming up with some process that is going to be implemented by staff. And the staff are the ones that are on the ground, boots on the ground. And so you got to, somewhere along there, there's a fine dividing line. When a board member is a policymaker, does not get involved in the operations and the implementation, but when they have a board member hat on, and so the policy, but sometimes they're serving on committees, and now they got the committee hat on. It's kind of different because now they're the boots on the ground too. They just got to make sure they don't direct the staff. And if you can keep that fine line between who directs the staff and who reports to the executive from the board level, which is the chairperson, if you get that communication on a regular basis, you shouldn't have too many troubles. I've seen it go really crazy when regular board members just think that they're the CEO or the chair and they're out doing things that they shouldn't be doing. We'll get to that later.
Keeping in mind some of the audience that's watching this or will watch this, I would imagine a lot of them are business owners. And I think one of the stereotypes of being a board member is the emphasis on having to raise money. I know some boards have what's called a give or get. And if I can mansplain for a moment, it's just simply, a board may say each year you need to either give $5,000 or help raise $5,000. So you sit there going, well, what if I don't? I mean, are they going to come and take my car? So I guess my question is, and maybe I'll start with Carmen on this, is how would you categorize, number one, any concern that the sole purpose of me being on a board is going to be to help raise money? And if that's not really my thing, what other value might I be able to bring to your board?
Raising money is critical. We particularly don't have a give or get. We don't have a set amount. I think it's unfair because I've got retired teachers that work circles around somebody that's sitting in a corporate office and can write, a $10,000 check. So who is more important to me? They're both important to me. I think the perfect answer, Mark, is the person that has identified your organization as their top 3 charity priorities. As long as you are in that, they will give what they can. They will work to their ability, because in our board, we are a working board. I mean, we have major events, and when you sign on our board, you don't come on with just you. You come on with your spouse, and if your kids are 18, they can serve beer too. So, it's everybody has something different to offer, but they need to make sure that you are one of their 3 passions.
I would say, it's the old time, treasure, talent deal. And you got to make sure you translate that to the board member. When we would recruit somebody, specifically, we were looking because we knew they had a lot of time. That's what we needed from them. Sometimes it was the talent, whether they had accounting background or especially events, whatever. And then, of course, treasure, it was a little touchy for us because we do need to raise a lot of funds in the chamber, but it is a membership organization, so you cover much of your income that way. But sometimes there are people that you want on there and you tell them right up front, you work for a bank or you do this, you do that, you work for a big corporation. We're expecting that you're going to be able to contribute a lot to our organization, recognizing that they might have other passions, as in Carmen does, where that's going to be their first priority. And maybe they've got the Cancer Society because somebody had cancer in the family and they got a passion for that. We can't compete with that because business is kind of cold, and we don't have that mission of the heart that you have in some of these other nonprofits.
We don't get to say it's all for the kids, right? We don't get to say that.
No, we don't. But we do things to help kids in education and all that, and we could take advantage of it. But again, time, treasure, talent, and making sure that people know that they're valued for those special skills they have. Sometimes you hit a home run and they got all three. Sometimes it's at least one. So I guess that's the position I'd taken over 25 years.
Yeah, I think it's good. Like we've been talking about, it's good to have that diverse group of people. You're gonna have those who are great at fundraising. You have those who will work their butt off till 1 a.m. in the morning cleaning up after an event, right? I mean, and you need all those folks to run a good not-for-profit, especially those that rely so much on fundraising.
I'd like to kind of approach the next question on two sides. Let's first take it from the standpoint of, have you as an individual been put in a position of having to respectfully decline an invitation to join a board, and how did you handle that? And then we'll flip it over and say, has anybody ever approached you and said, I want to be a member of your board, and you just did not feel that it was the right fit? So let's start with the first one. And again, I'll start with Carmen. Have you been in a situation where you've had to politely turn down an invitation? How have you handled that?
Yes, when I was with the newspaper and it was my job to be involved on every board, I didn't so much turn them down. I went on, and like I said, they got 1/16 of me. And the second part, we put in policies. This comes back to policies in your governance. I mean, because there's a lot of resume builders out there, and a lot of politicians, when they're getting ready to plan to run for office, they want their name associated with your organization. And so we have policies and procedures. We do have a vetting system with the governance. And then a potential board member has to attend 2 meetings and volunteer for 10 hours before they are voted on. And then they have to go through Carman 101 boot camp. So that's probably the worst thing they have to do, because I expect them, we do many, many, many things, but they need to be knowing exactly what we're doing.
What do they call that? I think it's in the Marines, when you ring out when you quit. You're like, I'm done with this. Ring it out.
Ring the bell.
Beat me down. I'm done. Ray, what about you? Have you been in a situation where you've had to find a way to politely decline, and how did you handle that?
Yeah, in the younger days, I used to just say yes to most things, and I learned to say no eventually. But lately, in this past 5 or 6 years, I guess, when people come to me and they say, hey, would you be interested in serving on this board? And I would just be really blunt. I say, look, I'm retired now. I've got a couple boards that I'm involved with. I don't want to go beyond that. And, if it should come a point when I leave that board, maybe I'd be interested in it. But I'm very clear about it, that I'm just not going to take on more than I could handle, I guess. In fact, just a couple of years ago, I had to make a choice between staying on the MPO and the opportunity to go over to Habitat for Humanity. And boy, that was tough, because Habitat had been I had pulled my heartstrings for years and years and years. And, Ken Adcock over there, great guy. And I said, okay, I'm going to come to this board, but I'm going to have to leave the MPO, which I did. And I guess you just have to make those decisions sometimes. And then on the other hand, I hated when somebody came up out of nowhere and said, I want to be on your board. But we had in place a nominating committee, and I would take that information. I would say, look, here's the process we go through. We will be looking at a whole bunch of different folks, because we have certain board openings coming. Your name has been cast in, give us a resume, and we'll go from there. And so that gave me some protection and a buffer. And sometimes the person was selected, and sometimes they weren't selected. And when they weren't, sometimes they got mad and didn't want anything to do with us. Other times we would say, look, you know, you didn't make it this time for whatever reasons, but, you know, don't give up. And then, you know, who knows, another election down the road and they got chosen. So sometimes you win, sometimes you lose with that. Very touchy.
Phil, how do you say no?
Similar to how they described it. I mean, I think a lot of times it's about time, right? We only have so much of it. And I agree. There have been times even after joining a board, all of a sudden my plate might get full, and I continued on the board for a little while and realized I really wasn't giving it enough time. So maybe then I picked it back up, but that did kind of quickly make me realize you can only spread yourself so thin, and then you're not really giving the board good service. And I never wanted to be that board member where we kind of said, well, you're not coming to anything, you're not showing up, we need to take you off. And I've had those conversations with people like, why are they on this board, we never see them. So I never want to be that. So if as Carmen said, if you get yourself into too many boards, then that's what ends up happening. And then life changes for everybody over time. It gets more difficult. So it's usually like they've said, it's usually been a balancing of the time is why, because I would love to help all the organizations. And so a lot of times, when I can't be a board member, maybe I go dance for them, or I go,
and you did a good job.
go find a way to help them, in a short period of time. So if you can't be on the board, and that's what I would encourage, if you don't get accepted to be on a board and you have a passion for that organization, help them raise money in some way, MC an event for them, do something that you don't necessarily have to spend as much rate all the time board meetings, but you can do those things as well, because they need volunteers too, not just board members.
Good point. That's a real good point.
There seems to be almost this self-fulfilling inbreeding of board members in this community. There's probably about 100, maybe 150 people who seem like they make up every board in this community. How do we as a group, how do we as an organization, how do we as a community broaden that net? How do we reach more people? How do we inspire more people, whether they're new to the community, new business, new retirees that maybe have new time on their hands? How do we broaden that group of 150 or so people?
Wow, that's a great question.
I'm taking notes, by the way.
Yeah, that's a thing. You're right, Mark. I mean, notice that very early on in my return back to the community, being from here, and it is the same. And then again, if you're here long enough, which I guess I'm starting to get to that point where I've been here long enough, then you see people who have been gone or come back, and it's like, wow, you took some time off, now you're back, but where's the new people? And I used to think we need to try to encourage the younger group, but that's such a hard group to find here, because it's not as young. So maybe the answer is, reaching out to some of the retirement communities around us. The villages has grown so huge. Maybe that's a way to find. It's a good question, and I know one that I agree. I see as a struggle for everybody. It is the same folks.
For the chamber, there are so many not-for-profits in Lake County. It's unbelievable and sometimes they're redundant, unfortunately. So actually, I kind of fought for years to not have so many not-for-profits form themselves when they could be part of some other organization. Really got to be a control thing. But when you find, like on my board, I might have had 7 or 8 members be members of 7 or 8 other boards, and you get into this thing, how much time can they really give? Very difficult question. We went both ways. We went into places like Kings Ridge, and we found out some incredible people that had retired were available, and we tried to make use of them as best we could. You start up these youth groups, if I don't know what you want to call them, to get the Generation Xers and the millennials. And I had quite a hard time there. I just couldn't get any footing. So I thought, well, it's because I'm old. Get a younger exec and maybe you'll trick some of those people. I don't know. But that's a tough one. And I think it's a combination of there's way too many not-for-profits in the area. And the good ones, the good volunteers out there are involved in so many because their hearts are so big that you burn them out, and then you got to find others to take their place. So that's why I say when you find board members, if they have a strong network, they can maybe come up with names that you weren't aware of, and maybe other entities weren't aware of that could help. I remember one particular person in another not-for-profit down South Lake. She was so good at finding those new people coming into businesses, and by the time I got there, she was already there. So I got to hand it to her, but that's what goes on.
Carmen, what's the silver bullet?
I think it goes back to committees. Ray, you mentioned committees. And I thought, I will never have a committee on this board to sit and argue for 2 hours about what color golf shirt they want, because they do.
Yeah.
You know, and to me, it's just easier to say it's going to be blue and let's go. But I think committees, if you identify or run into somebody that's got a passion in whatever area that you're working on, and you know it's not a good fit or time for the board, to get them involved that way with little tiny tasks, might be the way. Um,
Yeah, nurturing and getting them involved, that's a good way to do things. I keep forgetting that that's really the simplest thing to do. If you can get them in at some level, don't ask a lot of them, or don't demand a lot of them, and just see if they could work their way up there. And again, it's just a tough one. I think it's probably all over the country, I'm guessing, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, I'm sitting here with 3 people that I asked to do a little tiny thing that took 2.5 months out of their lives. So you know how small my asks are.
Yeah, they're small.
Andy, you created the Young Professionals Group. I mean, have you had success in that being an entryway into greater participation at the chamber level, either as board members or volunteers or members?
We actually have had some success in that. We've had a few board members that have come up because of that group, and you know, but we need more of that, quite frankly. I mean, we really do. I mean, we need more engagement, and I do the same. As you know, we look for people who seem to be interested, seem to want to be involved, and then try to pull them on. But you know, I have a question for Carmen. I mean, well, not for Carmen, but because of what Carmen said. You know, when you're looking at being on a board, so Carmen said you have to go through Carmen's boot camp in order to be on her board. But what are the questions, or what are the things that you should know before you say yes to being on a board? You know, like when it comes to the organization of the board. I know one of the things, you know, I'll throw out there is, you know, do they have board of directors insurance? That's kind of one of those little, you know, things that's important. But what are some of the other things that are important to know, and whose responsibility is that? I mean, you know, do you think it's the executive director's responsibility to communicate everything that you need to know, or is it your responsibility to ask the questions, or, you know, or is it a combination? Whatever.
I think and granted, I know a lot more now than I did when I was young and started becoming involved in the community. But one of the first things I would look for is D&O insurance, and to make sure. And I wouldn't just say, hey, do you have D&O insurance? I'd want to look at the policy. I'd want to go to GuideStar and see what their record is on GuideStar. I would want to look at their, you know, audit or their financials. And, you know, somebody mentioned, oh, all these numbers. I think you did, Mark, at a board meeting. And that's true, you do. And people are just like, okay, yeah, we vote, it's unanimous. Let's put it in the record. But, you know, and then I would want to know the integrity of the other board members. You know, how long have they served, or their board terms, that type of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a good one, Carmen. And I think you want to look at their bylaws and understand what their bylaws say. I think that's something a lot don't do, and they're not always easy to read through, but I think it's important to look at that. And as for whose duty that is, I mean, you know, it's not all on the executive director. I've been some of the boards that I've been on. I think it's good if you have a strong chair to go with you when you're doing that with a new board member, is to have your chair and your executive director there together, because then you've got both sides. You got the management side and you've got the board side that can answer some of the board questions.
Yeah, I would add too, and sorry I had to leave if somebody came to the door and the dog was barking. But of course, I said this earlier, if I'm thinking about going onto a board, I want to know, when does the board meet, how often, where they're meeting. I think that's so fundamental. It's, if you can't satisfy that, you're in trouble. The documents, as Carmen mentioned, you need to review all the documents as far as I'm concerned: strategic plan, organizational chart, the job description of a board member is important too, so they know what's expected of them. And then this is weird, and I'm curious about what other people think of this. I came through the JCs, and one of the best things that I got out of the JCs was learning parliamentary procedure, because you can't have an organized meeting without some type of fundamental understanding of parliamentary procedure. And when you were in the JCs, boy, if you didn't know it, you can get destroyed by somebody that did know it. So I was forced to learn, because we had a couple characters that they knew how to control the organization because of the parliamentary procedure. So I would ask, when you have a board meeting, is it organized, and do you follow parliamentary procedure? I'm curious to see if that's what you guys think of that. And I'm really curious to see about some of the potential board members that are out there. Do they feel comfortable with parliamentary procedure? And, should we offer some kind of class maybe to kind of move that along? Because I don't think it's there anymore for the most part, unless you're in like a Kiwanis or a Rotary. What do you guys think of that?
I mean, we operate under Robert's rules.
But
To be clear, not mine.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's become less formal than it was, Ray. But I do think you do have to have structure, right? You do have to have, even if you're not following them to the T, which I can tell you, I've been in very few boardrooms that follow it to the T, as the JCs probably did back in the day. Although I've seen a chair that used to be in the JCs run a board meeting, and that it was very different than other board meetings. So I understand what you mean when you say the JCs followed it.
Right.
They really did. But I do believe you got to have some kind of a structure to it, and otherwise
it's hard. When I was a new board member way back in the day, and I didn't know that, I wouldn't say anything because I didn't know how the heck it worked. Who makes a motion, who has a second, call in discussion, call the question, all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't have to be that formal, but it has to be done in some fashion. Otherwise, like when I came to the South Lake Chamber, and I hope nobody from the South Lake Chamber from those days was around listening, the meetings were 3 hours long, and they started at 6 o'clock at night in a restaurant, in a hotel. And I thought, this is insane. First of all, they're wiped out by then. And so, I moved the meetings to the morning, and I had a chairperson that really understood getting meetings done efficiently, 1 hour. And then from then on, all the way through the end of my years, usually the board meetings were no more than an hour unless something really critical was on the agenda. So again, I was just curious about all that, because if folks are not enjoying being at a meeting because it goes on forever, or it's all over the place with questions about the color of this or that, they're not going to be happy campers, and you might not keep them as a board member, especially the good ones. They're saying, I don't need this kind of stuff.
I was previously on a board that was notorious for making a motion, voting on it, passing on it, and then having a conversation about, what did we just decide?
Yeah, right.
And then they want to go back and they want to change it. So nobody's going to make a new motion. So it just, I think it has become a little bit lax.
Yeah.
I think also transparency, whenever, whatever organization you're with, or if you're thinking about being a board member of, or if you are on the board of an organization, making sure that they are very transparent with everything. If there's a feeling like something's being hit, especially obviously financials. I know we put not just our report out, but we also have our bank statements, so that our boards, if they want to pull a bank statement and look at that and compare it to what they're looking on paper, they can do that. But I know that that's one of those tricky things. And I know some boards have gotten in a lot of trouble because they were not as transparent as they should have been and are.
Yeah, that's on us as staff. That clearly, if we don't do that job, we're only asking for it.
Right, but understanding what is that, the board that you're going to be on, are they very transparent? Do they open up everything and say, come on in?
Yeah.
Well, and I would take that a step further, Sandy. I think that probably there's one board in particular that I'm on, and one of the things that I absolutely love is how great they are with proactive communication with the board members. It could be very simple things as opposed to those where you just meet once a month, and that monthly meeting is basically just throwing up all the information all within that hour and a half, or 3 hours in Ray's case. But I think the effort to constantly keep your board connected to what you're doing, whether it's, a simple good news email, hey, by the way, we just signed, great week this week, we have 5 new chamber members, just wanted everybody to know. It's little things like that I think keep your board engaged. It keeps you top of mind, especially if there's others that aren't following that strategy. And I think some are better at it than others. They should all be really good at it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But that's a double-edged sword too, Mark. A lot of the board members don't want to be harassed. I mean, if it's something that's timely and important.
Sure.
I mean, I know I sit on one board and I get about 3 emails a day, and I'm to the point where I don't even open them. I just cancel.
It's too much.
Yeah, I think that there's got to be that fine line in there, balancing out engagement versus annoyance.
How about when they text you at 11 o'clock at night?
It was 10:40.
Oh, sorry.
And I'm not
He's
even
not on my board.
He doesn't know.
Yeah, board members have a 10 o'clock cutoff. If you're not on the board, it's fair game with Carmen.
Yeah.
You're right. You're right. That 10 o'clock was a number that, Ann Dupay told me that once. She said, you don't contact anybody after 10 p.m.
Not with good news, right?
Right.
Somebody used the word engagement. One of the challenges that I found this year, because we took emergency resolutions, because we do operate under sunshine laws since we're affiliated with the governmental entity. And so we have been doing Zoom meetings since last March.
Mhm.
And I find that the level of engagement, I actually have more board members attending the Zoom meetings. But they sit there for an hour and shake their head and raise their hand when they vote. So are y'all encountering that, or have you gone back to in-person meetings?
We're in person now. We're back to in person.
Yeah, most everybody's just slowly going back to in person, but I think it is. I think the discussions are less. I notice when they're all Zoom, you don't have this. I mean, we're doing a pretty good job here, but typically you don't have as much discussion through these Zoom meetings. Although they do give you more attendance because it's, again, busy world, then people can fit it in a lot easier because they don't have to drive and don't have to travel. And they feel like when they're done with the meeting, they're done with the meeting. They don't stay for the meeting after the meeting. That often
in the parking lot.
The parking lot. And so I think, but I do think the discussions are not as good.
Yeah, the Zoom in is good in certain situations. The way I look, I've just not been. In fact, this is only about the 5th Zoom I've been on in 5 years. So I don't even know if they had it 5 years ago.
The retired life.
I miss the person to person. I don't know about you guys, but there's something.
My 5th today.
And that seems to be lacking. There's nuance that gets missed, and I would kind of miss that if we don't go back to something along the lines of person to person. And that's the strength of a lot of the organizations. It's the person to person contact.
I would agree. And I think, Phil just made the point that this one's flowing pretty well. I think we kind of have that magic number. If you have a board of 15, 16, 20 people and they're all Zooming in, inevitably somebody's just going to take a back seat. Probably half of your people are just going to take a back seat because they don't want to talk over the next person, or they didn't hear who was being called on, or whatever the question is. So I think there is a difference. That's the trade-off in the participation versus just being there. Carmen, what's your? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just about to say we have about 8 more minutes, Mark. So ask this question and then we'll wrap up.
Carmen, I was curious. Do your bylaws permit for a specific number of board members? And if so, where are you in relation to that number? How important is it for you to be at that number?
Our bylaws call a minimum of 17, a maximum of 35. And we are at 33 members, but 5 of those are ex officio, so and non-voting. So you could basically say we're at 28. Being a county-wide organization, I think makes a difference. Being the service area is 43,000 students and 5,000 teachers, and then as event heavy as we are, um, I like the larger board. A lot of people go, "What? You've got 35 people on your board? Are you crazy?"
Mhm.
But I've never had any difficulty managing it. Our bylaws are written, so our quorum is at 1/3 plus one. I think if I had a 50 or 70%, ratio for quorum, um, grants become a little bit difficult if we do have board members that are not active, because you have to show your percentage of attendance. And quite frankly, the biggest issue that we have had in Lake County is diversity. Absolutely diversity and involvement, since we're a county-wide organization, involvement from South Lake, quite frankly. It's, no matter how you look at it, it's 45-minute drive.
Well, I think that diversity it's a very broad word that it's, in your case, it's geographic. It's male, female, it's older, younger, it's ethnic, it's financial, it's areas of expertise. And Phil made the point early on about the importance of having a board that has diversity, however that board chooses to define that, I think. Which I think is probably, the toughest question to ask would be, how do we improve diversity among our boards as well?
You should reflect your community, I guess. When you're broad-based, like countywide, or us down in South Lake at the chamber, more regional, that organization has been lacking in diversity. You try your best to just bring people in. I don't have easy answers for it. But back to the question about the board, when I left, I think we had 21 board members, and I think you had a maximum of 25, something like that, I want to say. And that was nice in a sense, because sometimes you have one of those situations where, you've only got 3 openings, but you got 4 or 5 really good people that you'd like to bring on the board. So in a pinch, you could do that by just going up a few. The downside of it is it gets a little more cumbersome in discussion and dialogue and getting people to meetings and quorums and all that kind of thing. But, depending on the size of your membership in a membership organization, you can get away with, 25 people. If you say you had 700 or 800 members, if you got 300 members, you're not going to have 25 board members, I don't think. So it really has something to do with the size of your organization and just the complexity of the logistics.
Sandy, what do your numbers look like? Do you have a number that you try to achieve, and where are you in relation to that now with your board?
So we actually are 22 board members right now. We can have up to 25. So we have a little bit of there, and we try to just, we try to hit all of those things that we just talked about. We look for financial people. We look for who's going to be boots on the ground, who's going to be somebody that's going to, that our giver, give to us, who, can manage different things. So we try to look at that diversity in all different aspects, different types of business, obviously big business, small business, mom and pop, so we try to get, and that makes it even harder, because when someone says, well, your board's not very diverse, and I'm like, wait a second, I have this, like you said, it's relative as to what that diversity looks like. And I think we've done a really good job. I will say that Leesburg Chamber, I think we've done a really good job in getting very diverse board in all sorts of different areas, men, female, ethnicity. Obviously for us, again, different sizes of businesses is really important, because we want to have the perspective of everybody that is trying to do business in Leesburg, and not just the big, the big businesses, or,
Well, and I would probably punctuate for the people watching this. We've talked a lot about boards, And I think there's a certain level of commitment when you take a board position. But I think it's probably also fair to say, whether it's the chamber, whether it's the Ed Foundation, whether it's, the hospital has a foundation board, I would venture to say that if you are an individual who can bring a talent, a treasure, a dollar, whatever it is, to not be fixated on whether you can be a board member or whether there's just something that you can bring to help enhance what their efforts are. I know, I don't know how you guys see it. I got Carmen on one side of me and Sandy on the other, and I'm not a board member of either of their organizations, but we try to do a lot of things we can throughout the year to try to support them. So I hope that people that are watching this aren't necessarily thinking it's an all or nothing proposition. If you've got something that you can offer an organization that's going to enhance their efforts, that are going to improve and enhance our community, I'm sure they'll be more than happy for you to bring it on and not pin you down to a 2-year commitment sitting on a board. And it may eventually evolve to that, but what a great way to kind of sample that relationship, and then make that decision about that longer term commitment.
Well, and I know we're wrapping it up. So I just want to say one thing with that, Mark, because with Mark, what Mark just said, Mark, actually, I asked Mark to be on our board not too long ago. I asked him if he would be willing, and I loved his answer to me, because he said, what is it that what do you think that I'm going to offer that I'm not all like that we're not already? Because of course, Mark is very involved. He's one of the first people I call if I have a question, like for brainstorming things and doing things. He's always, he's willing to help with our teacher appreciation, all of those kind of things. He's very involved, which you love. And that's a great board member. But I love the fact that he kind of put it back on me as well. And it challenged me to think about that and say, right now, maybe this isn't the, maybe I don't necessarily, maybe this isn't the right time for you, but I have no doubt probably in the future, sometime I'm going to be able to say, this is the right time, Mark, and here's why we need you. So, hey, listen, I'm so sorry that
I didn't hear that last part.
I got you. Hey, thank you so much, Carmen, Ray, Phil, Mark. Thank you for participating today. I hope that the people that are watching this now and who will get to watch it later, I hope you see the value in this discussion, and hopefully that helps you out. One little thing I just want to mention: our next webinar is actually on August 18th, and we're going to be talking about how to overcome burnout. How to avoid and overcome burnout. We're going to have new panelists. We're super excited to have that. So put that down on your calendar to join on August 18th. And for those of you who happen to be watching right now, we have our breakfast tomorrow morning. Consolidated Minerals is our sponsor, and Diane Cornegay, the superintendent of the schools, is going to be our speaker. So she is, just so you know, speaking for us at 7 o'clock in the morning and then dancing for Carmen in the evening. So, yes, we are very excited about that. But thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to our attendees for joining us as well. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.